Testing 1, 2, testing 3, 2. Hello everybody out there in viewer land. My name is Jon Simpson. I hope you are doing well. In this Unity tutorial, we are going to be looking at rigid bodies. Rigid bodies are part of the physics engine of Unity, and with them we can do lots of cool things. In this tutorial, we will be looking at how to make a swinging door by adding a rigid body to an object and attaching that to a hinge component. Then we will create a projectile weapon that will attach to the first-person controller that comes with the starter assets. We will have it fire a rigid body bullet that can then interact with any rigid bodies inside our simulation game, etc. Alright, let's take a quick look at the three examples. So, to begin with, we will make a door that is a rigid body. It will react to either the player or the bullet, and it will be pushed on the hinge so that we can make a swinging type door. After that, we'll make a very simple gun and bullet combination with which we can shoot various objects that we've attached rigid bodies to. And then I have a few scripts that I will talk about at the very end that just do things like reset an object's position when it drops below a certain height. That way we don't have to worry about keeping track of objects that fall off of the platforms. Alright, in the next part we will set up our scene and import our first-person controller. Okay, so I had a visitor during break, and I just wanted to show you guys. This is Lucy. Alright, so I have created a new scene, and just so you're up to speed, under tools I do have my starter assets downloaded. If you haven't done that, you need to do that because we will be using the first-person controller from that. I also have Pro Builder installed, which is how I will build most of my shapes. In my new scene, I'm going to start off by creating a plane for my character to stand on, zeroing that out. Once that is in place, I'm going to go to Tools, Starter Assets, and then reset first-person controller. That's going to get my first-person controller in there for me and handle all of that. Now there's one thing we need to do to the first-person controller before we move on, and I believe it is under the player capsule. Under basic rigid body push script, you want to say can push, and that way it will interact with our rigid bodies that we create. When we talk about rigid bodies, what we mean is we're going to assign certain objects inside our game to follow the rules of physics. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to start by duplicating my platform and then just moving it over so I've got somewhere nice and clean to work. Going to use Pro Builder to create a simple cube. And we will kind of line this cube up. And I'm going to move it up so it's floating in the air. And when I begin the game or the simulation, nothing happens. The cube simply floats there, and that's because there are no outside forces acting upon it. So, what I want to do is I want to make the cube react as if it had gravity pulling down on it. To do that, we add what is called a rigid body component. So, we add our component. Now, if I were to test this, we would see that, oh, I forgot to do something. Every time. The cube passed right through the plane, And that is because I need to come in here and I need to tell the cube it is convex so that it will interact correctly. Let's do that again. And now it fell until it hit the plane, which acts as the ground. If I walk up to it, shoot. Okay, and we're back after these technical difficulties. When I was recording earlier and I played it, I noticed that something didn't function the way I wanted it to. My cube indeed reacted to gravity and fell to the ground, hit the plane like it was supposed to, but when I walked up to it, I wasn't able to push it. The reason for that is, after a little testing, is I need to go to the player capsule and I need to change the push layers from nothing to everything. Now I could be very selective about that, and if I was making a very large game, I would probably create a special layer and just put just the pushable items on there and tell it to push only on that. But for something small, simply saying everything is fine. And so now when I press play, it falls like it's supposed to, and if I walk up to it, my first person controller is able to push it around. Alright, so in the most simple way, that is how you can add a rigid body to an object. You create the object that you want to be part of the simulation. You add a rigid body component to it. You can change things like the mass, the drag, use gravity. Is kinematic means that it can be animated and then given over to the simulation. And a lot of other things that you can do. You can freeze it on different constraints. So it only rotates on the X, Y, or Z or whatever. In the next bit, we are going to see how we can attach this to a hinge so that when the player or something else pushes on it, it swings open and close, kind of like you would think of the old Western batwing doors. All right, so play around with this, and we'll see you in the next bit. By adding a hinge component, we can make our rigid body swing as if it were attached to the world where it is currently sitting, or we could even attach it to a different rigid body. We do that with a hinge component. So the hinge component allows us, connected body will allow it to connect to another rigid body. If there's nothing there, then it connects it to the world. Connected articulation would be rigid bodies attached after this particular hinge. For right now, we're mostly concerned with the anchor, which is where we are going to turn from, and the axis on which we're going to turn. If we increase this on the Y to 1.5, we will see that we have a little icon here, kind of looks like an arrow, and it is currently pointing along the x-axis. That means right now our rigid body would hinge on the x-axis. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so we're going to change that so that the rigid body goes, or the hinge goes up and down. So to do that, we change the axis. On the X, we type 0. On the Y, we type 1. And that's going to make the arrow point up and down. I'm going to use Pro Builder to go ahead and modify the shape. Remember, I'm just holding Control, so I snap. And all I'm going to do is make this a little more door shaped. just over 2. Okay. Let's go back to object selection mode. Currently we're set up on the very edge. I'm going to adjust that so that it rotates directly in the center. So under my hinge joint, I'm going to go to the x-axis, and I'm going to move the anchor just ever so, nope, not the x, maybe it is the, well, oh, I see what I'm doing wrong. There we go. I should really lower this to about, let's say 1. All right, and so let's set this to -2.5. Maybe I'll edit that out in post. Anyway, I have adjusted the center, the pivot point, so it is directly in the middle. Now you'll notice that my green box no longer aligns with the shape visually. And this is my detection box, so I need to fix that. So I'm going to go to my mesh collider. I'm going to right click and just say reset. And that's going to reset it so that it matches the new dimensions of my Pro Builder box. So if I test this now, I should be able to walk into it. The devil is in the details. So when I reset my mesh collider to reset the shape, it unfortunately reset the convex as well. So let's turn that back on, and here we go. Much better. Now we'll see that it just kind of spins all the way around, and I can hit it and push it back the other way. I'm being paged by Lucy, but that's a pretty good place to stop for a second anyway. Now that everything is functioning pretty much the way I want it to, I want to go in a little deeper in depth here on the hinge joint and talk about some of the options here. One of the things that is really useful is limits. I can limit the amount that the door will open from -45 to say 45 degrees. So that's going to limit how far the door will go. We can control the bounciness, things like that. Additionally, I really like to use spring, and this will control how quickly the door returns to its target position, as well as I would call it easing with the damper. It kind of slows it down towards the end if you increase the damper. So let's set the spring to 2 and the damper to 2. Not 100% sure what these numbers mean all the time. Play with different numbers. You'll get different results depending on the size of your simulation. All right, I'm going to test this and see how this does. What did I forget to do? Not sure how, but I turned off convex again. Try that one more time. At least if you see me do it 200 times, maybe it will stop you from doing it once or twice. Okay, so as we go through the door now, we'll see that it doesn't swing quite as far, plus it kind of slows down and tries to return to its original position. So we'll see it kind of slow down. So something that we could do with this is kind of build a little frame around it. Let's go ahead and lower that so it's almost touching the floor. You don't want this intersecting with any other objects because they will cause it to not move. They will interact as if two objects were hitting. So very quickly we can build a frame for our door. We'll start with a cube. Now again, because I don't want it touching, I'm just going to kind of be eyeballing the position. And this will purely be a visual thing. Little extrusion there. Going to extrude over. Remember to extrude is shift. Extrude for the downward bit. Can't be quite as accurate if you're not snapping, but for a quick demo I think it'll be fine. Alright. Slide it over just a little bit. And so now in your game you have yet another type of door, if you watch my other video, that you can then add to your game. And I think I'll tinker with those drag numbers just a little bit. So under my spring here, I think I will bring that down to maybe 0.7 and 0.5. Like I said, play with the numbers. It's more sorcery than science. All right, in the next bit, we're going to make a projectile weapon that will attach to the first-person controller. With a couple of scripts, we'll make it so that it can fire a rigid body bullet, and that will interact with other rigid bodies in our simulation. See you in the next one. As with everything in Unity, the input system has been updated recently, and I am still kind of behind the ball on that. I wanted to be able to use the new starter asset for first-person controller, so that meant using the new input system. Unfortunately, my gun utilizes an old input system idea. After much searching and trying to learn how to do it in the new input system, I was lucky enough to stumble across this idea. Why choose between the new system and the old system when you can simply enable both? So to make use of the starter asset and this gun, we need to change some settings in the project settings. So go to Edit, Project Settings, Player, and we're going to scroll down until we find where it says Active Input Handling. When you imported the starter asset, it automatically sets it to the input system new. Input Manager old, that was the previous way of doing things, or you can enable both. By enabling both, it's kind of like the best of both worlds. I hope to eventually update my script so that it is more modern, more modular, but I've got a lot of learning left to do to be able to do that. That being said, I hope that you will bear with this nasty little hack, but I was super happy when I found out that I could enable both. So simply enable that. It's going to probably prompt you to restart your project. Once you do, all the following scripts and everything should work without any hang-up. Thank you. To make our projectile weapon, we're going to begin with the cube. And then we're going to go down inside to polygon edit mode. Okay. Go into polygon edit mode, and I'm going to make the cube quite a bit smaller. Maybe not quite that far. Let's go ahead and just drag it back one. This bit I'm going to extrude. I will extrude again down at the bottom to make the handle, and then just pull it back just a little bit to give it a little bit of a pistol look to it. All right. Let's go ahead and reposition this over by the first person controller. Now, I've already pulled out my game view so that I can see my scene and work, as well as see what's happening in through the game camera. I think I will make the gun a little smaller. So again, go into polygon selection mode, R for scale, and then I'm just going to hand scale that down. I think that would be about a good size. Move it back up. And after we've done that, let's go ahead and rename our cube so we know what it is. And gun needs to be a child of main camera. For this to work with the new first-person controller asset, we have to make the gun a child of main camera. That way, wherever the camera looks, the gun will go as well. Let's go ahead and test this out. Notice what's happening. I'm not pushing, but I'm still being moved, and that's when I look down. And my gun interacts with the floor. That's happening because my rigid body on my gun, the mesh collider is interacting with the floor and it's pushing me along. So all I need to do is turn that off. And now wherever I look, the gun should look, and it doesn't push me around when the gun points down. All right. Next, we will create a dumpty, Jesus, a dump. Now that the object representing our gun follows the camera, we need to create an object that our scripts will use later on to know where to instantiate or create the bullet when the user presses the fire button. So to do that, we're going to create an empty. Let's go ahead and call this bullet spawn. And we're going to make bullet spawn a child of gun. Once we've done that, let's go ahead and zero out the transform. And then we will move it so it's just directly in front of the barrel of our gun. That way when the user presses the button, preferably mouse 1 is the way it's going to be coded, Unity will know to create a bullet and put it right there, and hopefully point it that direction. So, the bullet spawn is where our scripts pull reference, so it knows where to make the bullet. So let's make a bullet. We're going to make a bullet out of a simple 3D sphere. I'm going to come in and pro-builderize it. Control A, select everything, and R for scale. Scale these down. Small enough to be easily manageable. You can always resize it later. This happens sometimes. I don't think it affects a whole lot, but I really like it if my widget here lines up with this. And sometimes when it doesn't, things don't behave the way they're supposed to. I have found this seems to work, at least in a very rudimentary way. So if you know a better way of getting that to line up again, man, I'd sure like to know it. That'd be awesome. I am always open to useful comments. All right, so let's go ahead and bring this up, and let's bring it over close to us so we have a good idea of how big it's going to be. Sometimes scale can be confusing in Unity. So there we go. There is our bullet representative, at least currently. Next, we need to add a rigid body component to it. So that's what's going to give it the ability to move through our scripts. And let's go ahead and rename this. And while we're renaming it, we're going to call it Bullet Prefab. A prefab is a collection of objects from Unity that you have created here in the hierarchy, and then you drag to your prefab folder. I need to rename that actually. Let's rename that bullet prefab to, I don't think that's going to hurt anything. At least I hope not, because I've already got a bullet prefab and I don't want two of them. Having things named the same messes Unity up. So now I'm going to pull this over to my project assets into my prefab folder, and that allows me to instantiate it through script so that when the user presses the button, we see a bullet. Okay, sorry for that horrible explanation. In the next bit, we're going to take an in-depth look at the two scripts and how they work. We're going to implement them, and we're going to keep our fingers crossed that everything works like it's supposed to. All right, so we've been working pretty diligently. We have a gun-shaped object, and we have something to act as we have a rigid body, I should say, that acts as our bullet. So we're in pretty good shape. Now comes the time for the scripts, and as always, when it comes to scripting, I want to preface anything I say with I am not a programmer. I have some very smart friends, and they were nice enough to help me with these scripts. I will do my best to explain them to the best of my ability. So the two scripts that we're going to use are going to be gun and player gun controller. I have both of them open currently in Microsoft Visual Studio. And we're going to start with the gun script, which goes on our gun object. And we begin by the typical usings at the beginning, making sure we have whatever unit he wants us to have. This is our namespace for creating a class called gun. We start off by creating 3 separate variables. The first one is a rigid body, and it is a public. The second one is a public transform called bullet spawn, and the last one is a public float, which is how fast the bullet's going to be. Since these are public, they do create interface options for us. The first one allows us to assign the bullet prefab, what we just created, so it knows which bullet to create. The next one is for the bullet spawn. It tells it where to spawn the bullet. We simply drag the empty we created onto the interface to assign it. And then the bullet speed creates a slider that we can drag from 20 to 100. Okay, so in start, this is where we run a little check here to see if bullet spawn is equal to null, meaning that I forgot to assign bullet spawn. If it does, it looks for the first child of whatever object has it, and that would be the gun, and the first object of that, of course, would be the empty that we created. The body of this, what actually does all the heavy lifting, is the fire event. It is public. We're making it public because we call it through the gun controller script, which we will talk about in just 1 second. Whenever it is called, what it does is it creates a rigid body called bullet. It instantiates bullet prefab at bullet spawn and bullet spawn rotation, so at the right position and pointing in the right direction. And then it takes bullet and it adds relative force vector 3, meaning it's going to push it in 3D space. Bullet speed force mode dot impulse. Now this is where I kind of lose exactly what's happening here, but I know there are different force modes, and impulse creates like a push, and then the bullet will slow down after that. A little bit later, destroy bullet.game object simply destroys the bullet, because we don't want a bunch of extra bullets just floating around out there. The more things we instantiate, the more things Unity has to keep track of. Okay, so that is our gun script, and it goes on gun. And then on the player, in this case is going to be the camera, because that is what is holding the gun. We're going to put our player gun controller script. This is a very simple script. All it does is it creates a class called held gun, which is going to be the darn it, I've totally drawn blank on how to do this. Okay, held gun, which is a variable that we can assign inside the editor, and we do that by dragging our gun onto it, and it will go and find held gun and call the fire action, which is right here, which instantiates the bullet. So it's kind of circular. I hope this makes sense. As I put it together, it should come together. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to start by selecting my gun, and I'm going to drag gun script onto it. So now it's asking for some things. It's asking for bullet prefab and bullet spawn. So bullet prefab is bullet prefab 2, and bullet spawn is going to be bullet spawn right here. Whoops. Go back and grab the gun. Got to be decisive. Click and drag and drop it onto bullet spawn. So now it knows what and where to instantiate it. When we come up to main camera, we're going to grab the player gun controller script and drop it on there. This is going to ask for one item. It's going to ask for what is the held gun. We're going to grab gun, and we're going to drop it onto there. Now, fingers crossed, Hail Marys, whatever it is you say before you test something. Let's see how this worked. And look at there. It throws one of our bullets out, and the bullet mostly interacts with the door. Now, what you're seeing is called tunneling, and it happens. One of the ways that we can correct tunneling is to go to our bullet prefab, and under collision detection, we can set this to continuous speculative. There's a link to a really great cheat sheet from Tarodev in the description. Be sure and give that a look. He explains the different hit detections a whole lot more concisely than I could. All right, with that being said, let's go ahead and test this one more time. And I want to go ahead and make my screen a little bigger. So now it should hit it just about every time, and we shouldn't have any tunneling at all, which is great because you don't want your bullets bouncing through things. All right, that's the meat and potatoes of this week's lesson. I hope that you take the time to implement this and learn how it works and make something great out of it. All right, if I think of anything else while I'm editing, I'll add a little bit to the end here, but if not, have a great week. One of the things that we want to watch for when we are building in Unity is how many objects Unity has to keep track of for us. For instance, if I am able to shoot this physics object off of the platform and it just continually falls, well, Unity will do its best to track that object for as far and as long as it can. After a while, if I have a lot of that, that's really going to slow Unity down. So a simple, easy way to take care of that issue, in this case, is with a reset position script. Now, this is a really simple little script. All it does is simply get the position of an object when it is created, so as soon as it starts. And then in update, it calls for and finds out its Y position, and when it reaches below a certain point, it resets it back to its original position. Very simple, easy script. And all that we have to do is apply it to the object. So simply drag and drop it onto the object. Let's make sure that it's there. And let's reset it when it is, say, -10. So what that's going to do is it's going to bring it back. It's going to put it right back there. I'm actually going to raise that up just a little bit so it doesn't get caught underneath the plane. Here we are, and I can come up and I can shoot that object off, and then it will respawn. It does currently carry its momentum through, which is kind of fun. It'll make it fall 2 or 3 times before it eventually loses all its momentum and will stop. So now I could come in, I can make copies of these with Control D, and we could just bring them up and Control D one more time. And now I have 90 seconds worth of entertainment where I can just kind of shoot these little fellas off of here and they will reset themselves. So hours and hours of fun. Additionally, you can just go hog wild with this, kind of like I did in this one. Here we have a nav mesh that comes out and follows a set points, and if you shoot them, they will die, and then they are reset back to the beginning. We have a ball that we can shoot around. Here are several different examples of hinges. I see this being like a little carnival game. Got a big timer up there for no reason whatsoever. And then finally a giant Jenga tower that you can knock down. So have fun with physics. There's a lot to it. It's not going to work the first time. Do it as many times as is required to make it work. I hope you have fun with it, and I look forward to seeing what you all make.